You know, everyone likes to say that Goblet of Fire is when the series takes a dark turn, but to those people I ask, do you remember The Prisoner of Azkaban? Because this story is far from light. So, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is the third entry into the Potter series, and it's where I believe most people's favorite books in the series start from. And now, while I might be an outlier, I completely understand why so many people I know remember Prisoner of Azkaban as their favorite book. So what really works in this book, what doesn't quite land, and what makes it a strong contender for the best entry in the series? Let's find out. While Prisoner of Azkaban is still a mystery like the rest of the series, it definitely marks a departure from the two previous entries in terms of complexity, the villain's motivations, and the themes Rowling is willing to explore. In the early days of this channel, I posted a video titled "Can a Story Ever Be Too Dark?" where I expressed frustration with edginess for its own sake, and I argued that darkness doesn't necessarily make a story more meaningful. And while Prisoner of Azkaban is the darkest of the first three books, I feel like it manages to avoid the pitfall of falling into the teenage angst like death trap that the other two entries sorta do. Prisoner of Azkaban doesn't shy away from the darker elements, from the abuse Harry endures from the Dursleys, which is made harsher with the introduction of Aunt Marge, to the themes of betrayal, vengeance, and murder woven through the book's antagonists, plural, more on that later, to the embodiment of the fear, the grief, and sadness in the form of the Dementors. Rowling isn't afraid to push darker messaging, but she manages to do this without making it feel like she had been listening to albums of My Chemical Romance on repeat for years. Harry's third year at Hogwarts centers not around one of Voldemort's terribly planned plots, but on the escaped Sirius Black, who the Wizarding world believes to have been Voldemort's right-hand man, and the one who betrayed the Potters. Many believe that he is now out from Azkaban to finish Voldemort's work by killing Harry. On the surface, it's a nice break from Voldemort's usual schemes, but as the story unfolds, Sirius Black's portrayed as an antagonist in a way that almost makes him seem more dangerous than Voldemort in some respects. The conflict between Voldemort and Harry often feels impersonal, I think is a good word for it, where it almost feels like business as usual. I just gotta kill you because that's what I gotta do. Whereas the tension between Harry and Sirius feels deeply personal until everything is turned on its head. But not everything in this book is perfect. There are a lot of parts that got too much page time that I didn't particularly enjoy, and it contributed to some of the bloat in this book. For example, something in this book I just can't stand is the conflict between Hermione, Harry, and Ron over the firebolt. It's incredibly irritating because Hermione is clearly right, and Harry almost admits immediately to this fact, yet the friction lingers on for so long, and I wish I could have avoided it entirely. There is already good enough tension between Ron and Hermione due to Crookshanks and Scabbers, and that felt way more authentic. I didn't feel like I needed any of this because, like I said, Harry even agrees. He understands that this firebolt thing, even he just rationalizes it. Oh yeah, you know what? This is kind of strange that there's a man out that wants to kill me. All of a sudden I get a broom, something that I deeply want, from an unmarked card, and for some reason he's just electing not to see reason or act reasonable, and it just drove me insane. But back on topic, bloat is actually a consistent issue within this book. From the repeated signs of the Grim, to the extended time spent in Trelawney's class, which I felt could have been better spent developing Lupin's character, it all makes the first 3/4 of this book move a bit slow, and while the last quarter is some of the best writing in the entire series, the pacing in the earlier chapters I think is still worth a mention in this review. And finally, there's the well-known complaint of everybody, the time travel mechanic. See, to me, time travel is cool, but it's messy and difficult to write, and I like how it's used to explain Hermione's busy schedule, but you know it's a problem when even the author tries to eliminate it entirely from the series. Like, in that Department of Mysteries moment in Book 5, I could just feel Rowling's relief to just not have to worry about the questions of why don't they go back and use the time turner? It became too much of a headache, much like the Marauder's map in this book does, actually. I'll probably release a short on how Rowling had to almost write that out of the story because it bothered her so much. Honestly though, giving a 13-year-old the power to control time is crazy, and it's clear that Rowling wanted to experiment time travel plot without dealing with its long-term consequences, but none of these small critiques really take away from the brilliance that is Prisoner of Azkaban. There's just so much good in these pages. Like, for starters, this book is way funnier than I remember, and when dealing with dark themes, humor is crucial, and it's making me reconsider something I said in my previous video on the Chamber of Secrets, because unlike Chamber of Secrets, where most of the humor comes from Lockhart, in this book, everyone got their share of the jokes, and honestly, that makes a big difference when reading a dark material book like the future Harry Potter novels. Humor coming from all directions is super important. Like I said, the humor is just lifted by so many characters in this book, which is one of the strengths of the overall series, honestly. Every character really kicks it into high gear starting in this book. Harry begins to embrace his more sassy and angsty side. Hermione shows the courage that landed her in Gryffindor by standing up to her friends, and Ron continues being one of the most loyal best friends in the world. And honestly, I can't ever see that changing, unless, of course, Harry's name happens to fly out of a goblet of fire, but you know, what are the odds of that? Honestly though, the Golden Trio never really struggled with characterization, but the adults in the series did, and this book changes that a lot. And I think most of it has to do with the Marauders and Snape. Learning about James Potter and his friends adds so much depth to these characters. The relationship Harry builds with Lupin, or the bond he forms with Sirius in even less time, is great. Even smaller details like McGonagall's grief when talking about the deaths of Lily, James, and presumably Peter add a layer of depth that shows just how much she loves her Gryffindor students. The awkward tension between Lupin and Snape and its eventual resolution is also pretty well done. Learning about their younger years makes Snape feel less one-dimensional and cruel and adds layers to his character that he desperately needed. And it emphasizes the difference between Sirius and Lupin in their interactions with him. Rowling wrote Snape, Sirius, Peter, and Remus in a way that makes their past relationships feel believable, and when it comes to Peter's betrayal, Rowling captures the weight of that on Sirius incredibly well. The famous moment where Sirius says, "I would have died," hits hard, even when we just met him moments before, and I think that's just so... That just goes to show just how good Rowling can be at building meaningful relationships in her book. Another thing I've complained about in the previous two entries is how little magic Harry actually does, and in this book we finally see him doing some high-level magic with the Patronus charm, and everything about that plotline works for me. From Harry's primary motivation being his desire to keep playing Quidditch, to Remus teaching him the spell, to Harry's almost desperate need to want to hear his mother's voice again, all of it culminating in the casting of a corporeal Patronus that takes the shape of his dad's animagus form. All of it is just perfectly woven into the story. Everything just, it connects, and I think that's something that, I really admire in writing, just the way that a through line can connect. It's really important, and it doesn't feel forced in any way. And that doesn't even include the world building of Azkaban and the horrific concept of the Dementors, which the more I think about is absolutely nightmarish, and it's such a beautiful touch that Harry pictures Hagrid when thinking of a protector from the Dementors. It's just something that, I love that relationship, and I love that, Rowling even made Hagrid a part of that scene. I wish that had been referenced in the movies, because I feel like that's everyone's typical go-to when they're looking for a quick Prisoner of Azkaban consumption, and I just love that it emphasizes that bond. I mean, even Hagrid's first year as a teacher, and that bond he has with Harry, that's all so well written and so important for just the relationship and showing how much Harry loves his friends and how much the toll of what's going to happen in the next book is going to affect him. And I even mentioned the hilarity of the night bus, which is such a useless service that perfectly captures the absurdity of magic. There's just honestly so much to love about this book, and even though it can be a little bit clunky at times, that's not enough to detract from its overall excellence. I mean, even the way Rowling drops hints that Sirius Black isn't the real villain throughout the story and that it's Peter, it's all just perfect. I mean, Harry never really feeling like Black is a threat, or Crookshanks' desire to kill Scabbers, to the oddity of a rat living for so long, everything was just pieced together really well, and after the way the first two books ended, it was nice to have a more personal, character-driven story instead of one of Voldemort's just harebrained schemes. But let's get into the main part of these videos. What argument does Prisoner of Azkaban have for being considered the best in the series? Well, here's what I've come up with. First, this book sets the tone for the rest of the series and does it well. It's challenging for an author to write a darker story without alienating the reader's sense of joy, but Rowling balances that perfectly. The character-centric focus brings all the major characters into a new light, making them even more interesting, even if they're not always better people because of it. But I think this book's strongest case rests on the shoulders of Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, and the connection they give us to the world before Harry. Their relationship with each other, their love for James and by extension Harry, and the depth they allow Harry to explore takes Prisoner of Azkaban to levels of impact that the previous two entries simply couldn't reach. With its fearless exploration of the messaging behind cowardice and self-preservation and standing up to your friends, and the morality of revenge, Rowling really outdid herself with this entry, and while I don't think this book will be at the top of my list when all is said and done, it definitely has an incredibly strong case for being the best. Hey there guys, thanks for watching. Reigning Potter is a series, so be sure you haven't missed out on my previous review of Chamber of Secrets. If you have, no worries, it's on screen now, so go ahead and click it. But I don't just do reviews on this channel, sometimes I do video essays, and with Studio Wit's first look at One Piece, the anime remake, coming out, why don't you check out my video where I talk about the genius behind the idea of the One Piece power system. But whatever it is you choose to do next, as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day.